The sun hung low over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across forward operating base Condor. Lieutenant Emma Reeves adjusted her scope with practiced precision, her weathered hands moving with the quiet confidence that came from years behind a rifle. At 28, she had the eyes of someone much older, eyes that had seen too much through countless magnified lenses. "Wind's picking up, Lieutenant," whispered Sergeant Miller, her spotter for the last 3 deployments. 2 clicks east. Emma made the adjustment without comment. 3 years as one of the few female snipers in naval special warfare had taught her economy of words and movement. Her M40A5 rifle, which she'd named Mercy in a moment of dark irony, felt like an extension of her body. The radio crackled. "Nighthawk, this is command. Target convoy approaching checkpoint. You are clear to engage high-value targets only. Confirm?" Emma pressed her comm. "Command, Nighthawk confirms. Engaging on positive ID only." This mission was like dozens before it. Intelligence had tracked the Taliban commander responsible for a recent attack on a girls' school in Kandahar. 43 children had died. Emma had visited the site afterward, walking through the rubble, past small backpacks and scattered textbooks. She'd made a silent promise that day. Colonel Meryl Tengistal had recruited Emma personally after seeing her marksmanship scores at Quantico. "The Navy needs people who can make impossible decisions in impossible moments," the colonel had told her. "I think you're one of those people." Emma had never forgotten those words, especially during moments like this. Waiting on a dusty rooftop, calculating distance, wind, and the weight of what she was about to do. 6 months from now, Emma would be standing in the gleaming ballroom of the Naval Academy in Annapolis, surrounded by brass and ceremony, a world away from this gritty outpost. Admiral William Hayes would be presenting commendations, making small talk, perhaps having one too many whiskeys before making that fateful joke about her kill count. But right now, that future was unimaginable. "Vehicle 3, Miller murmured. "That's him. Facial recognition is a match." Through her scope, she could see the man clearly. He was laughing, speaking animatedly to his companions. He looked ordinary, almost grandfatherly. It was always jarring how normal monsters could appear. "Range, 847 meters. Wind holding steady at 7 knots, Miller continued. Emma took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled half of it, holding the remainder as she'd been taught. Her finger took up the slack in the trigger. In this moment, she thought of Lieutenant Susan Ann Cuddy, the first female gunnery officer in the Navy, who had faced discrimination and doubt at every turn, yet never wavered in her duty. "Send it when ready," Miller said softly. Emma's world narrowed to her crosshairs. She knew what this shot meant. Another tally, another life ended by her hand. Another night she'd lie awake questioning whether her actions served justice or merely perpetuated an endless cycle of violence. Another name for the leather-bound journal she kept locked in her footlocker, where she recorded every kill with details that would haunt most people's nightmares. But she also thought of those schoolgirls, of their families, of the promise she'd made standing in that rubble. "Nighthawk, taking the shot," she whispered, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as the first shot of what would become her most notorious mission cracked across the valley. 6 months later, the chandeliers of the Naval Academy ballroom cast a golden glow over dress uniforms and evening gowns. Emma stood uncomfortably in her formal blues, medals gleaming on her chest, feeling more exposed here than she ever had behind enemy lines. The weight of her service record hung heavier than any decoration. "Lieutenant Reeves," came a booming voice. Admiral William Hayes approached, whiskey in hand, trailed by a cluster of officers. "The woman of the hour!" Emma snapped to attention. "Admiral." Hayes waved dismissively. "At ease, Lieutenant. This isn't the battlefield." His eyes crinkled with the easy confidence of command. "I've been reading your file. Impressive work in Kandahar." The mission had started with that single shot, but it hadn't ended there. What was supposed to be a clean operation had spiraled into the most harrowing 48 hours of Emma's career when her team's extraction was compromised by an informant. The memory of those desperate hours flashed through her mind. The frantic firefight, the radio silence, the blood. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice steady, despite the memories churning beneath her composed exterior. "You know," Hayes continued, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby conversations, "I've always wondered about you special operators and your
Tallies. He winked at the officers around him. So tell us, Lieutenant, what's your count these days? Double digits yet? The room didn't quite fall silent, but conversations dimmed as heads turned. Emma felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same sensation she experienced before taking a difficult shot. Colonel Tangsdahl had warned her about moments like this, the casual curiosity of those who had never had to make the choices she had made. Emma thought of Sergeant Miller, who'd taken a bullet meant for her during their escape. He'd survived, but his career was over. She thought of the village elder who'd hidden them in his cellar despite knowing what the Taliban would do if they discovered his betrayal. She thought of the young girl who'd guided them through mountain passes with the same determination Emma had seen in those school ruins. 73 confirmed, sir. Emma said, her voice clear and unwavering. Each one documented to prevent another Kandahar massacre. The silence that followed was absolute. Hayes' smile froze, then faltered. In his eyes, Emma saw the realization dawning. This wasn't a game of numbers or a war story to share over drinks. The Admiral began, but Emma wasn't finished. Number 47 was a bomb maker who'd been targeting medical convoys. 48 through 52 were his security team. They had kidnapped 3 aid workers. Her voice remained professional, detached, as if delivering a mission report. 69 was a 16-year-old who had been given a suicide vest and told his family would be killed if he didn't walk into a marketplace. Captain James Reeves, Emma's commanding officer, stepped forward. Lieutenant? With respect, sir, Emma continued, her eyes never leaving the Admiral's eyes. Each number has a face. Each one had people who loved them. Each one made me question whether what we're doing is making a difference. She paused. And each one is with me every night when I close my eyes. The weight of her words hung in the air. Several officers looked away, uncomfortable with this raw glimpse into the reality they commanded from comfortable offices. A senior officer's wife discreetly wiped a tear. Admiral Hayes set down his whiskey glass. The jovial mask had slipped completely now, replaced by something more complex. Respect tinged with shame. Lieutenant Reeves, I believe I owe you an apology. But the damage was done. In that moment, Emma knew her candor had likely cost her any chance at further advancement. The truth was rarely welcome at events like these, where war was discussed in abstractions and strategic objectives rather than blood and nightmares.
The ballroom remained frozen in that moment of uncomfortable truth. Admiral Hayes' apology hung in the air, genuine but inadequate against the weight of Emma's revelation. Then, from the back of the crowd, came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. Colonel Merrill Tangasdahl emerged from between 2 groups of officers, her dark eyes fixed on Emma with unmistakable pride. The colonel's applause continued, solitary at first, then joined by another pair of hands, those of an elderly man in a wheelchair wearing the distinctive ribbon of the Medal of Honor. Lieutenant Audie Murphy's grandson, now a retired general himself, nodded at Emma with solemn understanding. Gentlemen, ladies, Colonel Tangasdahl addressed the room, her voice carrying the authority of her decades of service. What Lieutenant Reeves has given us tonight is not a breach of decorum, but a gift of honesty that we rarely permit ourselves in these halls. Admiral Hayes cleared his throat. Colonel, with respect, Admiral, Tangasdahl continued, I recruited Lieutenant Reeves personally because she possesses something beyond marksmanship. She has moral courage, the kind of courage Lieutenant Susan Ann Cuddy showed when she became the first female gunnery officer despite facing discrimination at every turn. The tension in the room began to transform into something else, a collective reckoning. Several combat veterans nodded silently, their eyes meeting Emma's with newfound respect. Admiral Hayes studied Emma for a long moment before speaking again. Lieutenant Reeves, would you walk with me? They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the curious eyes and whispers. The Admiral's demeanor had changed completely, the performative joviality replaced by genuine solemnity. My brother was a sniper in Vietnam. He came home with 62 confirmed kills and never spoke a word about any of them. 2 years later, he put his service weapon in his mouth. Hayes looked out over the glittering ballroom. We've created a culture where we ask people like you to do the unthinkable, then expect you to compartmentalize it for our comfort. Emma remained silent, understanding this was not a moment for words. I'm recommending you for the training division at Quantico, not as punishment, quite the opposite. We need instructors who understand the true weight of the decisions we ask our operators to make. 3 months later, Emma stood before her first class of sniper candidates, men and women who looked at her with the mixture of awe and uncertainty that her reputation now commanded. The story of her confrontation with Admiral Hayes had spread throughout the special operations community, transformed with each telling into something approaching legend. The first thing you need to understand, Emma told them, her voice steady as she paced before the eager faces, is that this isn't about how many targets you can hit. It's about how many lives you can save. She had them each write a letter, not to be sent, but to be carried, addressed to an unknown person they might one day be ordered to eliminate. In that letter, they had to justify their actions, not to their commanding officers, but to themselves. It was an exercise Colonel Anna Mae Hayes had once used with combat nurses, adapted now for those who would take lives rather than save them. Emma's own journal had transformed too. Alongside each name and date, she now kept a record of the lives saved by each difficult decision. The school children who could now attend classes without fear. The villages that had been spared from terror. The fellow soldiers who had returned home to their families. At night, when sleep remained elusive, Emma would sometimes receive texts from operators in the field, former students facing impossible choices in distant lands. They never asked for orders or permission, only for the strength to bear the burden that would follow them home. On her desk sat a framed quote from Janet Wolfenberger, the Air Force's first female 4-star general. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the judgment that something else is more important. Emma had found her purpose not in adding to her count, but in ensuring that those who followed her would carry their own tallies with the gravity and humanity they deserved. In the quiet moments between training exercises, she would sometimes think of that ballroom, of the silence that had followed her answer, and know that some truths, however painful, needed to be spoken aloud.